Okay, I thought that was going to be a very short share. Um, Stephen,
Put the
thank you
floor
very
in
much.
it.
Absolutely. My name is Rick. I'm an alcoholic and a member of the Men on Track group and Men Overtime group based in Boca Raton, Florida, and in cyberspace. And I'd like to say it's a pleasure to be here. I mean, it is a pleasure to be here. I do not love speaking, and I've never spoken either in front of 179 people before or at um, 8 o'clock at night. But I'm glad to be here. And um, I really appreciate Stephen. He's been a great friend and a great help to me. And I'll get into that in a little while. But my sobriety date is May 4th, 1984. 67 years old. I've been here for a while, and it's funny. We had at our men's group today. It was Medallion Day, and Mark, who's on this meeting, was getting his medallion, and he mentioned that that he's called me in the middle of the night, and I've answered the phone. What he didn't say was that was 8 o'clock at night. So the middle of the night to me. So anyway, I'll do the best I can here and share what it was like and what it's like now. And for me, I believe that I was born an alcoholic and a drug addict. I can remember from my earliest memories, probably in kindergarten or first grade, coming home from school and thinking that I needed to embellish what had happened to me during the day, for my parents to like me. And my parents adored me. I was the first of four children. I was the first grandchild. I was like the second coming, even though we were Jewish. It just seemed like they put me on a pedestal, and great things were expected from me from the beginning. But yet I didn't. I felt like there was something. I always felt like there was something missing. Like there was a secret that everybody else knew that I didn't know. And so therefore, I just remember, thinking like I had to lie about what had happened to me during the day. But when I finally, we grew up just north of New York City in Westchester County, New York, which I thought was upstate New York. I found out later after meeting people like some of the guys here from the Buffalo meeting that upstate New York is actually quite a bit further upstate than Westchester County. Westchester County is about 30 minutes north of New York City. And I grew up in this little town of 6,000 people. I was basically with the same kids from kindergarten through 11th grade, same 150, 200 kids. And it was a great place to grow up. But, at any rate, I picked up my first drink when I was about 13 years old. My dad owned a restaurant, and even though my parents were not drinkers, we had cases of booze in our garage. And my buddy John and I got a fifth of Canadian Club, and we went out into the woods, and we drank that fifth between the two of us. And that was my first drink. And when I first came into AA, I heard a speaker say that when he took his first drink, he felt like the pimples fell off. I always remembered that, and I always related to it because I didn't have pimples, but I felt like I did. I was short. I thought I was fat, but when I look at pictures, I wasn't really fat. But that's just how I felt. I felt like an outsider. And when I drank that fifth of Canadian Club, and I felt that warmth, go through my chest, I instantly felt like I grew 6 inches and became one of the guys. That feeling of uncomfortability went away, and this was great. And that's how I used alcohol and later drugs for a long time until I crossed that line. But so I graduated. Well, I don't know if I was graduating, but I think I actually went backwards from Canadian Club cases of Boone's Farm apple wine, and Strawberry Hill. And for those who were unfortunate enough to drink that stuff, it was terrible. But we would just drink cases of it on the weekend. And I did a lot of drugs later in my story, but I'm convinced that the Boone's Farm did more brain damage than any of the drugs that I did. And my drinking kind of progressed. It was on the weekends, in high school, and I was about 16, I'm sorry. My parents decided to move to Florida, and basically just it seemed like it was almost like literally the moment I fell in love with this. Well, I had fallen in love with this girl previously, and but it took her a while to see the light. And she was going out with me and going out with this other guy, and anyway, maybe it took 6 months or 9 months before she finally came around to me. And it seemed like just at that moment, my parents decided we're leaving this idyllic little town that I had grown up in and moving to South Florida. And South Florida in 1972 was like moving to another planet. This community that I grew up in was kind of a New York Times, upper middle class, Jewish, Italian, neighborhood. And, Broward County, Florida in 1972 was, like I said, literally like another planet, because, it was kind of 10 years behind where we were in New York. They had corporal punishment. They just had all these rules. And in 1972, everybody was protesting against everything. So I just, did what a good alcoholic does. I just became angry, resentful, bitter, made no friends in my senior year of high school. I would just go to school, come home, leave, go drink, go smoke pot, go to the racetrack. And, that was my senior year of high school. I ended up going to Boston University for college. It was a little easier to get in. So I got that, but it was a little easier to get in to Boston University back then. I probably would never get in today. Because I kind of realized somewhere around 9th grade that I was smart enough to not open a book and get C's, and I heard somebody say in a meeting a few weeks ago, I thought it was brilliant. They said that the shortcuts are the fastest way to the back of the line. And that was my life when I was drinking. It was just, one shortcut. I was just always looking for the shortcuts. Anyway, I went to Boston University in 1973, and when I got to BU, I was told that if I took speed, it would make me want to study. And so I would take speed and wait for the urge to study to come, and of course it never did. But I ended up, people who know Boston, I ended up at 3 o'clock in the morning in the combat zone in abandoned buildings with women of the evening, and that never ended well. And anyway, I was asked not to return to Boston University, and because I basically wasn't attending my classes, and ended up coming back down to Florida and enrolled in the University of Miami. Same thing happened at Miami. Enrolled in the Miami-Dade Community College. Same thing happened there. Excuse me. And things just progressed. I got an apartment in Coconut Grove, suburb of Miami, and met a girl who became my girlfriend. And about this time, I was about 19 years old, and somewhere around this age, I crossed that invisible line you hear people talk about in AA, where you know, um, I was losing control of my drinking, and at this time there was a lot of drugging involved as well. And once I started, I couldn't predict what was going to happen to me. Uh, so my girlfriend and I, she had a twin brother who was living out in Boulder, Colorado. He was a protege of one of the beat poets, William Burroughs, uh, and so we decided to drive out to Boulder, Colorado, with everything we owned in the back of a truck, and got out to Boulder in I think about 1978. And by this time, my drinking was completely out of control, and I started getting involved with cocaine, and that just was like throwing gas on the fire and accelerated everything. Around this time, the only thing to be, alcohol and drugs became the most important thing in my life, and everything else was secondary. So gradually, my girlfriend left. People around me started, just disappearing, and my life became very lonely. Very, I felt like I was 23 years old, 24 years old, and I just felt like I was dying. But I had no idea that I had a choice. I hung around with people who drank and drug like me. I was becoming increasingly paranoid and, hearing things, saying things that weren't there. I had built, I was 23 years old, and I built a movie theater in Boulder, Colorado at the time. Anyway, yeah, and then I really didn't know what I was doing, so that one didn't work out too well. But then I figured it out. I built another one, and it was a great business for an alcoholic because it was only open at night. It was a cash business back then, and it just again threw gas on the fire of my drinking and my drugging. But I was at that point becoming completely reclusive. I was afraid to come out during the day. I was afraid to answer the phone. I had all the blinds in my apartment pinned to the wall, so the no light could come in. I'd start my night at a bar on Pearl Street called the Blue Note. I'd sit there and drink for a couple of hours, and then I would go back to my apartment and then spend the next 10 hours until sunrise, and going back and forth between the living room and the bathroom, because the bathroom was the only room without windows. And I was just convinced that my apartment was surrounded at all times. I was really kind of just ceasing being a human being. My life had become an endurance test. The best I could hope for was to get through the day. I remember I had a pickup truck, a motorcycle, and a bicycle, and I was so paranoid that I was afraid to drive the truck or the motorcycle at night. And my typical night would be I'd start out at the Blue Note, drink for a couple hours, go back to my apartment, keep drinking and keep drugging for the rest of the night. And about 4 o'clock in the morning, I usually decided that I needed some female companionship. Well, the only female companionship available, in Boulder, Colorado, at 4 o'clock in the morning was, where you had to pay for it. And so I'd ride my bicycle down to the local establishment and, attempt to have some kind of a physical experience with someone, which was becoming increasingly impossible. Really, what I just wanted was some companionship. I was so alone and so terrified and so lonely that I remember one time I asked one of the ladies if I could just pay her to come back to my apartment, just talk to me. I just wanted somebody to talk to me because it chased everybody away in my life. And then, the worst, feeling in the world would be, kind of crawling out of there at 6 o'clock in the morning, and the sun would be coming up. I'd be covered in sweat and get back on that bicycle and ride home until, the liquor store opened up, or, somebody who sold drugs, it was late enough where I could call somebody and wake them up. And it was just, I dreaded the when the sun would come up every day. It was absolutely the worst moment of my day, because it was another 12 hours before it would get dark again. And that was my life, and virtually every day for the last 2 years of my drinking, I said to myself, I'm not going to do this today. I'm not going to drink. I'm not going to drug today. And I could never, ever, ever make it through the day on my own. And I felt like my days were numbered. Like I said, I people that I knew like me, didn't live to be 30 years old, and I didn't think that I was going to, and I kind of accepted that. Excuse me. So, around this time, my sister had who drank and drugged like I did, had come into the program and gotten through a treatment center in Florida. And I had flown back east for my grandfather's, I think, 70th or 75th birthday. And I saw my sister at that party. And I remember that it was the first time I could remember seeing my sister's eyes, because she had like dead eyes like me, just those dead alcoholic, eyes. And her eyes were bright and shiny. And I thank God and my sister today that she didn't tell me anything about the program. She just told me she was going to these meetings and that she wasn't drinking or drugging anymore. And because I was the kind of person, if you told me what to do, I would do the opposite. I still fight with that today. I'm I think the big book calls it like defiantly independent or something like that. And that's me. I still have to fight with that. And my mother, who I'm blessed that my parents are still alive, 91 and 88, 89, and but I still have the same problem today if my mother tells me what to do. So I'm just so grateful that my sister did not tell me anything about God, did not tell me anything about meetings, did not, she just told me she was going to these meetings and she wasn't, drinking anymore. And, when my time came, can you hear me okay? When my time came a few months later, I called my parents in a blackout and said I needed help. They sent me a ticket to come down to Florida to go to the same treatment center that my sister had. And, I drove my car to the Denver airport, parked it, got on the plane, never saw the car again. It took everything I had to get to the airport, to come down here, go into treatment. And, but I thought that, if I just did this for a while and complied with whatever they wanted to, I'd be okay and I could go back to doing whatever I wanted to. And I ended up coming down to Delray Beach to a place called the Beachcomber. And I was there for 6 weeks. And, in retrospect, they assigned me a sponsor. Back then, I don't think this happens too much today, but I didn't have a place to live. I came down here with $18 to my name, and I slept on my sponsor's couch. He was an electrician, and I became an electrician's helper. I got involved in different groups. I went through the steps with my sponsor Mike at the time. But in retrospect, I never changed. I really thought that I was an okay guy, and that if I just stopped drinking and drugging, that I'd be okay, you know. And you know, I stayed dry for 2.5 years, um, and I met my wife in the program. Um, you know, we got married, and you know, essentially we both got loaded on our honeymoon. She had 3 years, I had 2.5 years. We were in Jamaica. It was a disaster, and you know, of course, like any two good alcoholics, we had a baby about 10 minutes later. And you know, here were, you know, the three of us. You know, speaking for myself, you know, I was this, you know, emotional 14-year-old, you know, that I was when I picked up that first drink, because you know, I never grew after that, emotionally. And you know, so I was, you know, this immature, selfish, self-centered child, who had no idea what it meant to be a man, had no idea what it meant to be a husband, to be a father, to be a friend. I had no idea who I was. You know, that's the truth. I had absolutely no idea who I was. When I was drinking, I tried to be whoever I thought you wanted me to be. And that changed every time the person across the room from me changed. So, um, so we got married. We had this little baby, and um, you know, because of my immaturity and my indiscretions, we separated, and I came back into the program, um, uh, and my wife stayed out there a little bit longer. But we were separated for, you know, 11 months, and you know, I finally, you know, when I came back to the program, and I was in so much pain because of, you know, my behavior, what I had done, how much I had hurt my wife, you know, the situation that I was in. I finally saw it for the first time that the problem was me, that the first step has two admissions, right? You know, that there's a hyphen in the first step. It doesn't say we're powerless over alcohol and our lives have become unmanageable. It says we're powerless over alcohol, hyphen, that our lives have become unmanageable. And I never got that the first time. You know, I never got that my life was unmanageable by me. And when I finally had that moment of clarity, or was given that moment of clarity, um, it's like the doors opened up to um, to considering a relationship with God. You know, when I came in, I believed that there was no God. How could there be a God if all these terrible things happened? You know, I used my keen intellect that had gotten me into a drunk farm at the age of 25, you know, to say how could possibly there be a loving God that allowed all these horrible things to happen. But when I came back, I was so desperate, and I realized that my management of my life was going to kill me. You know, that I would die. You know, I almost died twice, and I would be dead again soon if I continued to run my life. So I, you know, began praying to this God that I initially didn't believe in, and I was able to start putting days together, and I was able to start going through the steps with my sponsor in earnest. And you know, when I took the third step prayer this time, I was given the gift of courage to see the truth about, you know, to do the work in the fourth step and see the truth about myself, you know, which was really not very nice to look at. But you know, I believe that I did not possess the courage then, and I do not possess the courage today to look at the truth about myself. That only comes from asking the God of my understanding, who I don't understand. You know, I've been celebrated 39 years, and I don't understand God. But you know, when I came back in, I started praying on my knees every morning, and I've done that virtually every single day for the last 39 years. And the guys who know me in this meeting know that I roll out of bed, and I do it before I go to the bathroom. I get on my knees and I ask God to help me stay sober. And today my prayers are, you know, a lot more than that, but that's where it starts for me. And I believe that's why I'm here today. You know, I had a sponsor named James Lehman who used to say that he knows that God is the one who's keeping him sober because he's the only one that he asks. And I believe there's a lot of truth to that. And, I started seeking this God and I spent years and years seeking, going to all different kinds of places. I didn't um, really understand the religion of my youth, Judaism, and I was just the kind of person that looked at what was wrong with everything instead of looking at myself. I never wanted to look at myself, but and even coming into the program, that for like the first 7 years of my marriage, once I finally got sober in 1984, whenever my wife, we were like literally like, two 14-year-olds trying to play house. We had two daughters and been blessed to be sober their entire lives. And, I feel like we all grew up together, and many times the kids were growing up faster than we were. But, for the first 7 years, every time we'd have an argument, I was incapable of not saying to my wife, if you would just do what I do, if you would just get a sponsor, if you would just go to meetings, if you would just work the steps, we'd be happy. And after 7 years, somebody said to me, why don't you just focus on being a better husband and not focus on what she's doing, focus on what you're doing. And to me, that's the beauty of the steps, is that it constantly refocused me on my side of the street, because my natural instinct is to focus on your side of the street, not mine. And, so I kept seeking and, going to churches and synagogues and ashrams and beaches and mountains, and went to Israel, and just seeking. And somewhere around 11 or 12 years, I got comfortable with the God of my understanding, or again, kind of God of my not understanding. And by this time, I'd been a father for many years to my two daughters, and I understood in human terms how much I love my daughters. So I thought about God as my father, and the kind of love that a father has for his children, and so that in human terms, that gave me a little bit of a model for finding this finding God. And I did a bunch of work around 10, 11, 12 years. And one thing I want to say is, my experience is, the most important changes that I've made over the 39 years in sobriety have come as a result of pain. I went through some things in 10, 11 years. I don't need to go into it, but, that caused me to really, take another look at myself and, go deeper. And, if you would have asked me at 10 years of sobriety who I was, I would have told you what I did for a living. A couple of years later, as a result of going back through the steps and doing some outside work, if you asked me who I was, I would tell you I'm a child of God, that I'm a husband, that I'm a father, that I'm a friend, that I'm a sponsor, that I'm a sponsee. And what I did for a living was and is like number 10 on the list. And that's, so much of what the program has given me is that perspective. But, for me, this business of growing up has been an extremely slow and extremely painful process for me. And, God has revealed me to myself one defect at a time. And, it's just taken a long time. When I had about 20 years of sobriety, I became extremely successful in my business, started making a lot of money. And I got, intoxicated by the money, and I made decisions based on greed. I became partners with people who I knew were not good people because they had, a tremendous amount of money. And I thought, oh, I can achieve this, and, even though I was going to meetings and I always had a sponsor, I always sponsored guys, and, always stayed close to the program. again, in retrospect, I, um, just got kind of sidetracked by success. And, that was 2005, 2006. And by, 2011, 2012, I had lost everything. The recession had come, um, uh, and it was a big fall financially, and it was extremely, extremely painful. I describe it like um, 5 years of open heart surgery with no anesthesia. That's how it felt to me. It was a very, it was just a difficult time. Having a wife and two daughters, especially, I they depended on me, and I didn't know how I was going to take care of them. And I begged God every day just to help me get through the day. And that's when I really, I think, began to understand what a day at a time meant, on a much deeper level. And, I got closer to God because I had no choice. I just didn't know how I was going to get through every day. And this went on for years in sobriety. And, but I just put one foot in front of the other, and literally begged God every single day, please help me get through this day. Please show me what I should be doing, in order to pay the rent, and put food on the table for my family. Um, excuse me one second. So, eventually that things got better. I met a man, had a 15-minute conversation with him outside a building one time, and it completely changed what was left of my career. And I started at the age of 60, doing something completely different, and became successful at it. Same field, but different part of it. And so, kind of fast forward to the beginning of the pandemic, when I've been part of this men's group that I mentioned for 27 years. We met, every Monday at noon in Boca Raton. When the pandemic hit, like a lot of meetings, we went from 1 day a week to 7 days a week. And basically I've been on, almost every day for the last 3+ years. And we have a little house up in the mountains of Tennessee. So we decided to go up there to ride out the pandemic in March of 2020. And a bunch of things happened. What my experience has been is that, it seems like, and I have no idea how this stuff works. I have absolutely no idea how it works, but I've seen it in my life that things, there are things that happen that prepare me for the next thing that's going to happen. And, if as my friend Sandy says, if I pay attention, because, I'm always looking like right here, right in front of me, what I think is going on. And what I've learned over, this time that I've been sober is that, I have no idea whether something is good or bad when it's happening. I'm very opinionated. I think I do, but if I look back, virtually everything I thought was the worst thing that could happen turned out to be for the best, and vice versa. So, it just taught me that I'm emotionally involved. I just don't, it's like that Chinese farmer story. I don't know if it's good or bad. I have no idea. And so we were up there in Tennessee, just my wife and I, and Frankie, my dog, sitting on the floor here. And so, we started, doing these Zoom meetings every day, and going to, 300 meetings in 300 days. And I was going to 3 or 4 meetings a week before the pandemic. But, this just put everything, like for a lot of people, on steroids. And a bunch of guys that I was sponsoring, we all did a private step meeting, and really went, and I've been through the steps, probably a dozen times with sponsors, and done a lot of 4th and 5th steps. But we went through the steps over like a period of 9 months, and it really kind of opened me up and prepared me for, this next thing that was going to happen. And in December of 2020, I had developed this habit of going to sleep listening to a podcast. So I was asleep and listened to this podcast, and I woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and it was like somebody had thrown cold water on me, and I was just wide awake. And I put on this podcast. I listened to this guy who had written this book, talk for 10 minutes, and in 10 minutes, I learned something about myself that had been basically affecting every aspect of my life since I was 5 years old, and I hadn't scratched the surface of it in all those, you know, fourth steps, and it had to do with this critical voice inside my head that I was completely unaware of. That I now realize comes from, in a non blaming way, probably from my mother, who was kind of critical and but I had no idea that this voice was running in my head 24/7. Had absolutely no idea. And when I listened to this, and as a result of it, started doing some journaling every day for 10 minutes. All of a sudden, I had a huge problem with procrastination. I would use procrastination to create all these jackpot situations in my sobriety. And what it did was it created all this psychic clutter in my head. And there was left very little room for like creativity and being present with people that I loved. And it kind of clogged up this space where I could have like depth and weight to relationships. And so when I started doing this work in December of 2020, my whole life in 5 months transformed. It's like I was doing everything every day, not procrastinating on anything. And my life got incredibly better. My business took off. My relationships with everybody that I knew became deeper and more fulfilling. And it was just an incredible experience. As a result of doing the step work with these guys, the step work, set me up for this discovery. And then in May of 2021, 5 months later, I started spitting up blood one day, went to the emergency room, and found out that I had stage 4 cancer. And I had basically been completely healthy my entire life, physically, never had any physical pain. I made up for it in emotional pain, but so I went through this really difficult process of dealing with this prospect of the cancer. The treatment seemed very draconian. It was radiation and chemo, and I had this, of course, my thinking, which is my problem, had me sitting in the corner, drooling into a sippy cup, 100 pounds, with a feeding tube in me for the rest of my life, and my life was over. It just didn't seem like a good deal. I was really ready to like take my 6 months to 9 months to live, and cash in my chips. I'd had this incredible life. I've had such a beautiful life with my wife and my daughters, and more friends than I've had time in the day to spend with them. I've just had this beautiful life as a result of AA and of sobriety. Anyway, it was eventually pointed out to me by a friend that I really wasn't letting go and really wasn't trusting God. And here I was at the most difficult time in my life. And as a result of my relationship with God, and really my relationship with God has become a relationship. I have, gone that, when I did that work in like 12 years, I started back then, we had daytimers, and I started crossing off like hours during the week, and I put TWH, time with him, and, to put aside time to get closer to God. And, as a result of that, I had this incredible life. And anyway, I spent the next week begging God to give me the strength and the courage to do what I needed to do. And I didn't know what that was. But, and after about a week, I was given this gift. And my tremendous fear of death was taken away from me. And there was a peace that came about me, that's never left me since. And I went through the cancer treatment. It was difficult, but I'm cancer free today. And I, as you can see, I'm not 100 pounds, and I don't have a feeding tube, and I'm not drooling into a cup. But cancer has been the greatest gift. Like everything else that I thought was the worst thing that could happen, getting cancer was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. My relationship with God has changed dramatically. I realized that I was given this gift where I now am able to help other people. Through Stephen's help, I was able to set up a Zoom meeting for people in AA who have or had cancer, and we meet twice a week, and we've been meeting for the last year and a half. And I see a number of people on the screen here who go to that meeting as well. And that's been one of the greatest experiences of my life. It's just been, and I love, talking. I'm sorry that people get cancer, but, I realize that, I know what it's like to sit across from that doctor and get that news. And even with 30 something years of sobriety and that be that deer in the headlights. And I'm able to share that with other people now. And it's just like, coming into the program and working with a newcomer. I guess in closing, I would say that, God could and would if he were sought. I ask God to direct my thinking every day. I discovered really I'm a really slow learner. It just in the last few years that the 7th step is a daily deal. That it says in the 12 and 12, in the 12th step, that's one paragraph where he's talking about all the steps that we ask God to remove our defects of character under the conditions of the day in which we ask. And that line has changed my life, so that every day I ask God to remove my defects of character under the conditions of today, and I have the most beautiful, beautiful life, and it's got nothing to do with my cancer prognosis. It's got nothing to do with my bank account. As much as I love my children, it's got nothing to do with their health or my wife, whether she's, we just celebrated 39 years of marriage, and, all those things are so important to me. But, my relationship with God is at the center of my life. And my job every day is to connect to that power, to connect, to that source of love that connects all of us. And when I do that, everything's great, and no matter what the circumstances. So, Steve and Todd, thank you very much for asking me to speak. Love you, my friend, and thanks.